Beautiful day outside, 72 degrees. We've got the president's lawyer, Jay Sekulow, going to be with us in just a second.
Talk about yesterday's hearings. Hours and hours worth of hearings.
But first, Jillian, you have some breaking news you just told me.
We are following a number of stories, so let's get started with this Fox News alert now. Jeffrey Epstein on suicide watch after being found injured in his jail cell. The wealth financier reportedly discovered on the floor in the fetal position with marks around his neck. He may have been attacked by an inmate, but investigators believe it could be a plot to get transferred out of a Manhattan jail. Epstein is being held without bail for sex trafficking and conspiracy charges. We will keep you posted on that. Also breaking right now, Puerto Rico Governor Ricardo Rossello resigns after nearly 2 weeks of protests.
Many of you have expressed their right to freedom of expression. I have received everything that you have said, and I have heard you loud and clear.
Thousands of protesters marched through the island's capital after leaked conversations show the embattled governor sending offensive text messages. Rossello officially steps down next month. Puerto Rico's Secretary of Justice, Juan Vazquez, will take over. And now this story. The teens wanted in the murders of a North Carolina woman and her boyfriend could soon go out in a, quote, blaze of glory. The father of one of the suspects tells reporters in Canada his son is on a, quote, suicide mission. Police believe they're closing in on Cam McLeod and Briar Schmigelski. Now, after their SUV was found on fire, it's thousands of miles away from where they are suspected of setting another truck on fire and killing a man. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez following through on these remarks about meeting with Nancy Pelosi.
Are you interested in having a conversation face-to-face with House Speaker Nancy Pelosi?
Why wouldn't she? The House Speaker and AOC will meet in person tomorrow in the wake of a Twitter feud stemming from an emergency border funding bill. Their discussion comes as Ocasio-Cortez and the Democrat squad get their second comic book. AOC and the Freshman Force will be released in December. The first edition met with controversy since it resembled Wonder Woman. So we'll see how this one is received.
Yeah, well, I never thought we'd be in a comic book controversy or conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much, Jillian. All right, yesterday at this time, we were preparing for Robert Mueller's testimony on Capitol Hill.
Too bad he didn't prepare.
So long, we'd waited to, he wrote the report. It took a couple of years. It took months to haul him before the Congress. He was reluctant. He didn't want to go. And yesterday we found out why not. In the New York Post today, they described him as bumbling Bob, a train wreck of epic proportions. Democrats were looking for a soundbite to reignite their hopes that the president could be impeached.
Yeah, and he kept saying, can you please repeat the question? He definitely was not on his game. It was clear that he wasn't in charge of this investigation. He didn't know what Fusion GPS was. He contradicted himself and had to come back and make a correction in the afternoon for something that he said in the morning about.
Yeah, but other than that,
indicted. It was a train wreck.
Yeah, he deflected questions 198 times, 5 times. He had to go find the microphone. He was just speaking into the wind. And he said, can you repeat the question over 30 times? Here's a look back at the 8 hours that was.
Welcome, everyone, to the last gasp of the Russia collusion conspiracy theory.
Well, your investigation is not a witch hunt, is it?
It is not a witch hunt.
Reason, again, that you did not indict Donald Trump is because of OLC opinion stating that you cannot indict a sitting president, correct?
That is correct. I want to go back to one thing that was said this morning by Mr. Liu. We did not reach a determination as to whether the president committed a crime.
I'm quoting from the Steele dossier, extensive evidence of conspiracy between the Trump campaign team and the Kremlin. Did Russians really tell that to Christopher Steele, or did he just make it all up and was he lying to the FBI?
That's beyond my purview.
No, it is exactly your purview, Director Mueller, and here's why. Either Steele made this whole thing up and there were never any Russians telling him of this vast criminal conspiracy that you didn't find, or Russians lied to Steele.
You can charge all kinds of people who are around the president with false statements, but the guy who launches the guy who puts this whole story in motion, you can't charge him. I think that's amazing.
I'm not certain I agree with your characterizations.
Well, I'm reading from your report.
Well, you know what? I don't think he could follow anything Jim Jordan was saying. I don't think he's even clued in to investigating of the investigators and some of the legitimate questions Republicans.
Well, they were asking him about his report, and it was obvious yesterday he had not written it. Maybe hadn't even read it.
Right. Jay Sekulow is the chief counsel, American Center for Law and Justice, and member of the president's legal team. Good morning, TJ.
Hey, good morning. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Thanks for being here. What was your takeaway?
Well, look, I mean, Bob Mueller was trying to defend the indefensible. That report was incoherent as written, and it was worse as played out on live TV. I mean, it was a terrible, terrible waste of taxpayer money, in my view, on a whole host of levels. But I think yesterday kind of capsulized exactly what this is. The president has been under this, as he calls it, a witch hunt, and it was. I mean, look what they were trying to find. And yet, when they put the architect, the person that's in charge of the investigation, the person that wrote the report, up on the stand, it was, I could quote every commentator from every other network, not ours here, but from every other network, and they said, disaster, train wreck, horrible. This is not what I'm sure they expected. And I'm a bit surprised, frankly, that I mean, I know Nancy Pelosi was trying to put on a happy face yesterday with the press conference, but it was surprising to me that even members of the Democratic Party were last night recognizing that this was, as one commentator called it, a train wreck.
Well, it was clear, and we heard testimony, Jay, to the effect, essentially, the whole operation was staff-directed. And that brings up the question, you know, who exactly was pulling the strings on this thing? I mean, we saw Robert Mueller. He would go to work. He would sit behind the big walnut desk. At one point, we've got a little montage here. Here's Mr. Mueller being pressed on if he should have polled his prosecutors on their political views.
You hired a bunch of people that did not like the president. Let me ask you, when did you first learn of Peter Strzok's animus toward Donald Trump?
In the summer of 2017.
You didn't know before he was hired for your team?
Know what?
Peter Strzok hated Trump.
Are you aware that Ms. Jeannie Rhee represented Hillary Clinton in litigation regarding personal emails originating from Clinton's time as Secretary of State?
Yes.
Did you know that before she came on the team?
No.
So that kind of makes the point that the president has said they've got all these angry Democrats behind the scenes on the Mueller team.
So you have 12 or 13 prosecutors that twisted and turned and tried to do everything they could to come up with a collusion narrative, a conspiracy narrative, an obstruction narrative, and even was going to be asked. Congressman Ted Lieu asked the question, and Bob Mueller gives an answer saying we didn't prosecute because of the OLC opinion, and then, of course, that contradicts his own report. He comes back in the afternoon and says, let me correct something. It was only, by the way, one of the biggest takeaways of the whole day. And he comes back, and what did he say? We did not make a determination on culpability. In other words, as they say in the report, we did not address the issue of the president's conduct as a crime. Not addressed. We didn't make that determination. In fact, they said difficult questions of law and fact are present here. So there's a whole host of reasons they did not move forward. The most of which is they had no case. Believe me, if this group had a case, does any one of you three disagree with me that if they had a case, they would have tried to bring it?
I know. And you got to read the first half of the report, the way the Russians are scrambling to get some type of hooks into the Trump campaign because he wins the election and they have no connections. And Putin's tasking some of his oligarchs to go find out who I can talk to. Hope Hicks talking about, I got a call from a Russian on my voicemail. I don't know who it is, but if it's Vladimir Putin, I don't want to blow him off. That's how confusing the collusion was, which was non-existent. Real quick.
Well, how about the fact that they, he said, well, there wasn't a question of collusion. We didn't look at collusion. And then page 180 of his report, he says collusion is effectively conspiracy.
Jay,
that's in his report. His team wrote it.
Well, he was seeing it for the first time. Jay, if you're known as a conservative attorney, right?
Yep.
So if someone had to investigate you, hire Jay Sekulow to investigate a a Democratic president, you'd get huge pushback if you were assigned to that legal team. But Robert Mueller says it shouldn't matter in the legal. I never ask people their political affiliation.
Jay,
What's the truth?
Jay, they were giving money to Hillary Clinton's campaign and other Democratic campaigns.
So here's the irony of this: is Bob was trying, he says, right, to avoid even the appearance of bias or impropriety, and yet they don't ask that question. But let me take it another step further, and this is one that cannot be ignored. Peter Strzok's emails were bad enough, the text messaging, bad enough, right? Horrible. But yet Bob Mueller and his team allowed the phone that contained the information to be wiped clean. Right. In other words, destruction of evidence. That's what was going on here. So you know what? It is time for the investigators to be investigated, and that's happening now. We're going to get to the bottom of this.
I get if you're investigating a crime that is not politically motivated or doesn't have to do with politics, that you're not going to ask your attorneys how they vote. But in this case, they're trying to figure out if the president was colluding with Russia. They know that, well, clearly he doesn't know what GPS is, Fusion GPS, but Fusion GPS used their money. They funded this. They track that back to Hillary Clinton. They track that back to the DNC. That money was used for the dossier that was written by Christopher Steele. And that was used to survey the president. The president's campaign. How did they not know where they stood politically?
Ainsley, well, they didn't know where they stood politically. How did he not know who Fusion GPS was? I mean, where are you living in a cave?
He didn't.
I mean,
he accidentally kind of answered that. He said, I'm not familiar with. Well, actually, that's not in the report.
Okay, well, but the Steele dossier is all over that report. But here's the most telling issue, I think, when he was asked about that exoneration nonsense.
Exactly.
Prosecutors do not exonerate. And he was asked, is there any historical precedent for the policy you put forward on exoneration? And Bob Mueller said there is not. And so the president's being treated differently than any other citizen in the context of a burden of proof that is upside down and contrary to our entire system of justice.
You know, after watching it for 6 hours yesterday, Jay, I think a lot of people were frustrated because Mr. Mueller did not provide a lot of answers. But we would still like to know about Fusion GPS and the Steele dossier and stuff like that.
Yeah, and they also, Steve, they try to discredit the answers that we provided to the questions that were submitted. But, you know, I will tell you this, in the correspondence that we had with the special counsel's office regarding those questions, they never raised an issue of untruthfulness in the responses, that they were not truthful. And he kind of intimated, although I don't think it was a direct answer to the question, but some of the networks ran off with that. And I really got on that last night and said, that's just not true. I have the evidence on that. And that's not what the correspondence shows at all.
So when you look at where we go from here, and you mentioned the text messages getting deleted, and Horowitz found a way to recover a lot of them, so we have some of it. How much do we know how much is still out there? Did Horowitz collect additions? Because there's reports over the last 2 days that they found additional texts, and they lead to Comey.
Yeah, so there's a whole series of issues with James Comey now, and that's James Comey and this agent that was planted inside the White House. That, I think, is going to be a huge issue. It's the guy named Ferrante. He was lent over by the FBI to the NSA in the White House. Wow. He was communicating with Comey. There's going to be, look, I think what Durham's going to do, the U.S. attorney that's been charged with this by Attorney General Barr, he's going to get to the bottom of this. I think the Horowitz report is going to be devastating. And you notice James Comey's silence for the last 3 or 4 days.
John Brennan's invisible.
To go back to what you said about Fusion. To go back to what you said about Fusion GPS, how did he not know? How is he not familiar with that after we spent $25 million, basically 2 years of an investigation? What does that tell you?
He does not have a television. He does not have a newspaper.
I know.
Because it's been in it for
you know what it tells
years.
me? I'll tell you what it tells me, Ainsley. He wasn't running this investigation.
Right.
This was an investigation run by his deputies and his assistants.
Then why would they make him the lead guy? Why would
here's the real question you got to ask yourself. Why is it that when he asked a couple of days ago that in order for him to testify, he wanted Aaron Zibley, his deputy, to be next to him, and ultimately got sworn in the House. Why did he have to have that? Well,
now we know.
You saw why, exactly.
Right. Jay, is the president more apt to look to pardon some of those who paid the price for knowing him today than yesterday.
You know, I haven't had discussions with the president regarding who gets pardoned, who would not get pardoned. That's not in my purview. That would be in the purview, obviously, it's the president. Constitutionally, that rests with the president. But there's been no discussions, as far as I know, regarding those issues. But I will tell you something. There has been a lot of injustice here. I mean, some of this is just outrageous. I mean, like George Papadopoulos and goes to jail for 14 days. I mean, what is that, like an advanced traffic ticket in New York? I mean, this is some of the things that went on here. And look, the irregularities of this investigation from the outset are disastrous. But Jerry Nadler let Bob Mueller testify yesterday. Right. And after he asked to have Aaron Zeebly there, you would have thought he would have said, maybe this isn't such a good idea. But you know what I think they thought? I think they thought we, when I say we, the president, the Department of Justice, or somebody was going to try to block this. Nobody did. And there they were. They kind of got hoisted on their own petard there. And then them trying to come out and say, oh, we got great revelations. He said he didn't exonerate the president. Right. He can't exonerate a president. He can't exonerate you, Congressman Nadler, me, or anybody else. Congress, they don't get to do that. Exactly.
On to health care, Iran, North Korea, and immigration. Please, we need something to get done. Jay, thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
Well, it's happened again. A third video of New York City officers getting soaked. It's now surfacing.
PD officers being drenched with buckets of water. It's the latest clip surfacing this week as officers are being attacked by citizens. And this morning, an update. At least one suspect allegedly linked to the incident in Brooklyn has been arrested, and our next guest is calling on Mayor de Blasio to take some responsibility. I want to bring in West Miami Police Chief Nelson Andrew. Chief, your reaction to what's happening in this city.
Good morning, Brian. It's incredible. Not the lack of respect, the restraint being shown by the officers is amazing, but this has to stop. When do the buckets of water become more than that? They become the bricks, bottles, and so forth. And then you hear the crowds cheering in the background. That's unacceptable, completely unacceptable.
And when they sully one uniform, whether it's knocking off one of your hats or throwing water on you, they sully all of your uniforms. The disrespect can ripple across the country.
Absolutely. This is starting in New York, and fortunately it's been limited to that. But I can see this going on and becoming a trend nationwide, and it has to stop. We have to nip this in the bud.
So Mayor de Blasio sees the urgency. Let's see what he had to say in a tweet. Thank you to New York's finest for their speed and professionalism in this arrest, because it was 3 arrests yesterday. We're the safest big city in America. Thanks to the tireless efforts of the NYPD officers, we stand with them today and always. Is that enough?
No, that's not enough. The mayor has been known to speak harsh words at the police department. I understand he does not have the respect of the officers, and he needs to come out a little bit more forceful than that. He can help put an end to this trend.
Chief, we know in New York City it began to turn around when they did the Broken Windows program, where every little crime was going to be punished. We were going to straighten it out from the bottom up. Then that was pulled back. Stop and frisk, a proactive way to stop gun violence. That was pulled back. And now we see officers maybe in some act in some ways overzealous in some incidents. Now they're all afraid to act because it's going to destroy them personally and professionally. How do we stop this trend while still being responsible?
Yeah, the officers, I don't blame them, because they're fearing the repercussions that could come down from City Hall. Unlike our mayor in West Miami and in most cities that are constantly speaking well of the officers, thanking them for their hard work and, and the job that they do. This is something that we're not seeing from Mayor de Blasio.
So I understand, too, we had some police officers here. They do not back to where the officers walked away meekly. They do not back to letting these guys get away with it, because they got to go back to that neighborhood the next day. And if they show a little bit of weakness, they're going to pay the price big time. So in terms of police work, those 2 rookies in particular are being called to task and put on desk duty. Are they right?
Yes, they should have taken some action. Again, they walked away fearing what may have come down the pike later on, but that some action should have been taken on the part of those officers right there when that was going on.
Right. If they feel the politicians have their back, it'll be worth it. But right now, just a lot of people are saying, I was going to be a cop. I don't think so. I don't like this new trend. That's why mayors and Americans have to step up. This got to be a wake-up call. Chief Nelson, thanks so much. Chief Nelson, Andrew, thanks so much.
Thank you, Chief. Appreciate it.
All right, coming up straight ahead. In God We Trust. Back in the classroom. One state making it in the law, make it the law for the new school year. Governor Mike Huckabee is praising that decision. Francis Scott Key, I believe, penned that phrase first. He'll join us next as we gradually push in on his full screen.
Aisha Husney is live outside of that very bar in Mississippi as we learn that Allie allegedly knew or did know her alleged killer.
That's right, guys. So I'm standing just outside the Funky's bar. This is a bar that Allie leaves Friday night, and then she walks in this direction, and that's when surveillance video picks her up. So let's watch that video together. This was released by police just last night. So you can see Allie actually walking on the sidewalk. She looks like she's on her phone. And then at the corner, the van picks her up and takes her home. We know from her roommate that she gets home around midnight, but then she winds up 30 miles away at a market with Brandon. Now, we're also seeing old photos that show Allie and Brandon together, indicating the two at least knew each other. And take a look at this, some strange Twitter behavior. On the night Allie was last seen, Brandon's account liked this tweet, which shows a rifle scope and a picture of a woman with the caption, "She'll never see it coming." We actually talked to a student who took a class with Allie this summer and has even seen Brandon out in these bars. Listen to what he told me about Brandon.
I've seen him at the bars before, yeah. He's always out all the time on the square. Not really like a great guy. Came off as kind of rude. Definitely shocking because he never seemed like, he didn't look like the kid who would do something like that.
It's all very sad, but take a look at this. People across the country lifting up this family, raising money for Allie's funeral expenses on this GoFundMe account. It has already passed $20,000. Unbelievable. Meantime, back here in Oxford, we're still waiting for that bond hearing for Brandon. We heard it was going to happen yesterday. It didn't happen, so we could likely see more details coming out in this murder investigation before that hearing happens. Guys?
All right, Aisha, thank you for the live report from Mississippi.
Those social media likes, very creepy.
Yeah. Got to get to the bottom of that.
Right. Almost, well, now it just changed. It's 30 minutes after the top of the hour. In God We Trust, heading back to the classroom. This September, under a new law, all South Dakota school districts will be required to prominently feature the national motto.
But not everybody is giving the move a passing grade. The Freedom from Religion Foundation calling it, quote, a terrible violation of freedom of conscience to inflict a godly message on a captive audience of school children.
Wow, it sounds terrible. Let's see if Fox News contributor Mike Huckabee feels the same way. Governor, do you side with those who question In God We Trust? Are you for In God We Trust? I don't know where you stand.
Well, Brian, I think that they ought to rename their group the Freedom from Sanity Foundation. Look, it's our national motto. It was put into place by legislation. If they don't like it, they can lobby Congress to change it. Right. In the meantime, I got a suggestion for them. Take all the money out of your pocket. Every bit of it, because on those coins and on the bills, it says In God We Trust. Right. So it's a national motto. I got one complaint with South Dakota and what they did. Okay. The legislature said you've got to do it, but they didn't create the money to actually pay for it. That's right. My view has always been, if you force it, you fund it. So it's an unfunded mandate. That's where they failed. They should have said, we'll pay for it if we think it's important.
But they could do it with private donations.
Yeah, they probably could. They could fund it with the money that says In God We Trust. Why should we trust God?
Well, we should trust God because the underpinning of our society and civilization, whether some people want to admit it or not, is the Judeo-Christian understanding of personal responsibility and accountability to God. And if you go back and understand what the founders believed, even those that were not necessarily religious, they recognized that the basic fundamental foundation of our society and our law is a Judeo-Christian understanding of accountability to God and to each other.
All right, Mr. Huckabee, we're going to talk to you about this op-ed you wrote in just a minute regarding Robert Mueller, but I'm sure you were tube-side yesterday. What are your impressions about the guy we've waited so long to hear from? We finally did, and it wasn't exactly what people thought.
No, it really wasn't. In fact, the Democrats kept saying, we've seen the book, now let's have the movie. They had the movie. It was called Bob Mueller's Day Off. It was a really disastrous performance, and I think it probably did more to help cement the re-election of President Trump than anything we've seen in a long time. And the one thing that, to me, was baffling, when Bob Mueller said he didn't know anything about Fusion GPS.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's when they should have ended the hearing and saying, okay, you know what, we're done here. Mr. President, we apologize for all that we've put you and your family through. It's been really a true hoax and witch hunt.
All right. And real quick, you say in your op-ed on FoxNews.com that Mr. Mueller doesn't want the scandal to end. Why?
Well, because I think he is a part of those Democrats that he hired. I don't think that was accidental. He hired a whole staff full of people who hated the president. And I think he doesn't want it to end because he hopes that there will be just an ongoing effort to destroy this president. But I think it's having the exact opposite effect. Americans aren't stupid. They see through this. And I think the Democrats in Congress yesterday embarrassed themselves badly.
Well, that's what everybody's talking about today.
No one more embarrassed than Robert Mueller. But thanks so much, Governor.
Thank you.
Good to talk to you. Take care.
All right. 7:33 here in New York City. Meanwhile, a Fox News alert at this hour. Jeffrey Epstein reportedly on suicide watch. Host Rob Schmidt live outside the Metropolitan Correctional Center in Lower Manhattan. Inside is where Mr. Epstein is. Rob?
Okay, guys, yeah, I'm having a hard time with IFB, but we're here live outside the Metropolitan Correction Center here in Lower Manhattan. The New York Post reporting this morning that Jeffrey Epstein, the 66-year-old finance multimillionaire, was found on the floor of his jail cell this morning, nearly unconscious, or late last night, I should say, nearly unconscious with wounds to his neck. He has been taken to a nearby hospital here in Lower Manhattan somewhere, and he is reportedly on suicide watch. What we don't know at this point is, was this really a suicide attempt? There is speculation going around about what this could be. It could have been a suicide attempt. It could have been an attack by another inmate, perhaps, maybe just a ploy to get out of this jail, which we understand is just a horrible conditions, a horrible place to have to stay, especially compared to the lifestyle that Jeffrey Epstein was living up until just a couple of months ago. Epstein, of course, arrested on July 6th for charges of sex trafficking. Prosecutors allege he abused dozens of girls over the years, young underage girls over the years. Some of those alleged victims have been speaking out recently. Epstein had connections, many big, powerful connections, to people like former President Bill Clinton, to Prince Andrew. There's a whole catalog of people. Even the president, Donald Trump, used to have a relationship with him until he said he had to kick him out of Mar-a-Lago for inappropriate behavior with an underage girl. He's facing 45 years in prison for this. He has been denied bail because of his wealth and his connections. We'll keep you posted. We have calls into the jail and to Epstein's attorneys. We'll keep you posted if anything develops. Guys, we'll send it back to you.
All right. Rob Schmidt, thank you very much.
Yeah, a lot of rumors about what really happened. But 21 minutes before the top of the hour, Jillian's around here.
That's right. Good morning to you. And we're following a number of stories, including this. A high school didn't know MS-13 gang members were inside classrooms until a boy ended up dead. Police linking several students in an MS-13 clique to the killing of their classmate at California's Panorama High School. Students and parents tell the Los Angeles Times they were left in the dark about the gang's alleged campus activity until the accusations came to light. Officers say they didn't alert the school's community because they didn't think students were in danger. A man on his honeymoon plunges more than 50 feet into a volcano, and get this, he survives. Clay Chastain and his new wife were hiking in St. Kitts when the Indiana man climbed into the dormant volcano and his rope snapped. Chastain suffered a severe concussion and cracked his vertebrae, but somehow still had energy to climb out and walk 2 miles to the volcano's base before help arrived. His wife calls it a miracle. Cops will temporarily stop making marijuana arrests in the wake of a new hemp law. Williamson County, Texas, just north of Austin, trying to determine how to handle pot cases under new state regulations.
Right now there's some confusion, not just from us, but from every level, from the state down.
According to the law, hemp is defined as part of a cannabis plant containing 0.3% or less of THC. Lawyers feel they must test a substance to prove it is illegal. Right now, there's no lab capable of doing that. Plant-based bacon is in the making. Protein company Beyond Meat announcing it's creating the product to, quote, build out its portfolio. It's also working on plant-based steak, but says both products are still going through development. Dunkin' Donuts is selling the company's plant-based sausage at its stores in New York. Let's look at your headlines. Steve, send it to you.
All right. Thank you very much, Jillian. Robert Mueller yesterday grilled about Fusion GPS and the anti-Trump dossier, but he wasn't going to talk about it because he didn't know about it.
When you talk about the firm that produced the Steele reporting, the name of the firm that produced that was Fusion GPS. Is that correct?
I'm not familiar with that.
It's not a trick question. It was Fusion GPS.
Not a trick question. Mueller also wouldn't discuss the origins of the investigation into the Trump campaign, despite the fact that it was in the report with his name on it. Here to discuss a legal panel, former DOJ prosecutor James Trusty, screen left, former DOJ Deputy Director of Public Affairs Ian Pryor, former federal prosecutor Francis Hakes, and former Deputy Assistant Attorney General under President George W. Bush, Tom Dupree. They all work for the Department of Justice. They were all watching yesterday. And James, we're going to start with you. What's your headline?
Well, headline is no headline. I mean, there was no big soundbite moments. The one thing that Mueller gave them in the morning by accident, which was his apparent reliance on the OLC opinion about indicting presidents, he took away by lunchtime.
Because somebody on his staff had to write it out what the correct answer was.
Well, that part of the report has always been mush, and he fell into his own quicksand there in terms of trying to explain something that's kind of hard to explain.
And Ian, yesterday, one of the moments that was interesting is the conversation about exonerate. You know, Democrats have been saying, look, the language in the report is it did not exonerate the president. However, when you look at what their job is not to exonerate the president, it's to find a crime.
Right. Look, we live in a system where it's a presumption of innocence, not guilt. Right. And if you're not proven guilty, then you are exonerated. You are not guilty. So that fact, I mean, the fact that Democrats continue to hammer on that point, it's a losing argument for them, but they continue to go down this road.
Francie, one of the foundational things of this case was it was based on Russian collusion. And it looks like the FISA warrants and everything else were based on the Steele dossier, which were provided by Fusion GPS. And for him to say, Fusion GPS, what the heck's that? It's like, what?
Well, it doesn't make any sense that he doesn't know what it is. It's disturbing that he doesn't know what it is. And to me, the most important story of his entire testimony and really the entire investigation is what's been omitted from the report. And what I think is a fundamental failure of this investigation, because it looks as though they didn't even read the FISA application, the FISA warrants, the FISA take, and determine, as every good prosecutor, as these guys know, as every good prosecutor should do, figure out what's at the base of your investigation before you start.
Well, maybe those FISA applications are just rubber stamped by the judges. We don't know. They're looking into it. Tom, what was your headline about what you saw yesterday? You know, Mr. Mueller made it very clear he didn't want to go up there. And after that performance, a lot of people are going, oh, no wonder.
Absolutely. Look, the Democrats needed a home run, and they didn't get anything. It was a weak ground ball at best for them yesterday. They tried to get Mueller to say that he would have indicted the president for obstruction, but for the OLC opinion, he wouldn't go there. They tried to get Mueller to confirm some of the facts in his report, and many times he wasn't even familiar with his own report. So from the Democrats' perspective, the discussion has now shifted from impeachment to simply this being a factor in the 2020 election.
Jim, it looks like this was staff-driven. You know, Robert Mueller would go to work. We'd see him in his SUV. He'd go to the Department of Justice. He'd sit behind his desk, but it sounds like everybody else was running the show.
Well,
somebody else was running the show.
He was delegating, and that's no big surprise. It's no surprise that he didn't sit down in a cabin and take pen to paper and write the report either. That's just not the way big DOJ projects work. But the reality is, the practical takeaway is that if you're John Durham and you're looking into the origins of this probe, you've got to go below Mueller. He's not going to be the source of information. It's going to be Weissman and some of the line attorneys.
And at some point, do you think, Ian, that Mr. Weissman is going to get interviewed by Mr. Durham or has been interviewed by Mr. Horowitz?
Yeah, I mean, he should be. Certainly, he was the one that sent the email back in, winter of 2017 about Sally Yates resisting Trump and how great it was. And if he was the one running the show, look, when I was defending this at DOJ, I would think, hey, we have a strong Republican at the top that's going to defend against sort of any potential conflicts or perceived conflicts of interest. But if he did not have the capacity to supervise that team like we all thought, then that's a big problem. And then it goes to Andrew Weissman.
Francie, you know, the president has tweeted out 1 million times about what is it, something like a dozen angry Democrats on the Mueller team. At some point, and some of the congressmen yesterday were querying Mr. Mueller about it, doesn't political bias come into, don't you ask somebody about it if you're going to hire somebody for such a politically sensitive job?
Well, he should have. I mean, I worked at DOJ in the U.S. Attorney's Office where there are Democrats, Republicans, we're all doing our job because justice shouldn't be political.
Right.
But when you're investigating one political candidate, using at your base the oppositional research divined by another candidate, you certainly need to find out whether you've got political issues inside your own shop. And inside Mueller's shop, he had people who were not only just Democrats, which would have been maybe fine,
right,
but people who actively represented people in the Hillary Clinton email investigation. That is a bad look for the Department of Justice and for the special counsel.
Tom, I read a Politico article this morning that said that people inside the White House were so happy with how things went off the rails and it was a disaster for the Democrats. Legally, what kind of shape is the president in on this Thursday morning?
I think the president is in excellent legal shape. I think from a legal perspective, the first question is there any evidence of high crimes and misdemeanors? We didn't see that in the Mueller report, and I think after yesterday's hearing, there's absolutely no evidence of that. So legally, he's in good shape. There was some talk about can a president be indicted after leaving office? I mean, look, theoretically, could that happen? Potentially. But I think the president has to be sitting in a pretty comfortable position today.
All right. Great discussion, Tom and Francie, Ian, and James. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Meanwhile, while many lawmakers focus on